So, hello everybody and welcome to our virtual 6-7 Pall Mall, where we're running our series of webinars hosted by our friends, experts, winemakers and our wonderful sommeliers. Please look at our website under events where dates and themes are being added every day. Later this evening we'll be speaking with Paul Roberts, MS, who is the CEO of the iconic Napa producer Colgin, and tomorrow we'll be speaking with Richard Hemming MW, who's in Singapore, and he'll be joined by Andrew Gunn of Iona Wines in South Africa. And then after that we'll be talking with Jasper Morris MW, who will be all about Chablis tomorrow, and then followed closely by Wink Lorch. After her wines of the Jura from last week, she'll be doing wines of the Savoie and Bougie up in the French Alps. So now it's a pleasure to welcome Rebecca Gibb, MW, author of Wines of New Zealand, very good book, who will be talking about the history, the geography and the wines of this amazing country. So as usual, please click on the chat box. Please share with us what you are drinking. We hope it's a New Zealand wine. Please share us where you are drinking it from, and if you can take a photo, hashtag it 67 from home. That would be great. If you have questions for Rebecca, please click on the Q&A box and write your questions in there, and hopefully at the end she'll do her very best to answer them all. So we hope you've got a glass of Savvy B at the ready, and welcome Rebecca.
Greetings, thank you. I'm gonna try and ensure that the technology works. Apologies if it doesn't. I'm sure Rona will tell me if it's going wrong. So welcome to the Wines of New Zealand this evening. I'm going to be taking you through a little bit of history, some geography, a little bit about the climate. By the end of this, I hope that you've enjoyed yourself, because wine is meant to be fun. You might have learnt a little bit, and for those of you that have got the wines in the glass, sadly they didn't turn up. So I've got a glass of water. I have got a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc in my glass from Nelson, from Green Hop Winery. Sadly, I don't have the wines with me, so I'll just be talking you through them. I'm afraid I live in the north of England. Perhaps the couriers don't work up here, so apologies. Greetings to you all. I see that you're coming in from around the world, which is very exciting. So first of all, I'm going to share my screen with you, which is a presentation that I shall be talking to. So here we go. It may not work. Okay, 2 ticks. I think it's gonna work. Here we go.
It's okay, Rebecca. We'll all be experts at this in a few months.
How are we doing?
Perfect.
Does it look beautiful? Can you just see this? Can you see the slide? Yes, and you can't see the next slide though, right?
No, just see the slide.
All right, let's get going. Okay, you can see the third slide though. So
yeah.
Right, we're going to go back to slide 1. Okay, this is the first slide, the introduction slide. The image here is of Ponui Island, which is just off Waiheke Island, which is a short ferry ride from Auckland CBD. Now, there is a couple of vineyards on this island, and a donkey sanctuary and 2 farmers, which kind of sums up New Zealand in its way. New Zealand is such a long way away from here. I went and lived there for 6 years and didn't quite lose my northeast accent. Hope you can all understand me. If I'm talking too fast, let me know. So we're 11,386 miles from Pall Mall. The first time I ever went to New Zealand, I went there because I was going to do a harvest in Australia, in Victoria, and I just thought, I'll just pop over to New Zealand. You don't pop over to New Zealand. It's a long way from anywhere. So 2 hours passed, and 3 hours passed, and nearly 4 hours passed. So the distance from Sydney to Auckland is about the same distance it is from London to Moscow. It is a long way from anywhere. I'll talk a bit more about that on this slide, New Zealand's unique climate. Now here we are. New Zealand is a long half-eaten lamb chop, according to Rhys Darby, who found international fame in Flight of the Conchords. Very funny man. He said that, and I can agree with him. And if you look around here, New Zealand is in the middle of the South Pacific. To the west, you have the Tasman Sea, which separates New Zealand from Australia. When you're surrounded by sea, you do have a maritime influenced climate, of course. You have the Antarctic to the south, So you're getting lots of cold air blowing in from there. New Zealand has a lot of penguins too. But not all of New Zealand is cool climate. I think that's a misconception. While the South Island is considered a cool climate, you and Martinborough on the very bottom tip of the North Island, when you get to the Hawke's Bay on the east coast of the North Island, up to Auckland, up to Northland, these are temperate to warm climates. Northland is called the winterless north, and for good reasons. It's very much a tropical climate, lots of palm trees. They also grow grapes there, but their harvest tends to be about a whole month before even Central Otago has started. New Zealanders are never further than 130 kilometres away from the sea at any point as the crow flies. And 95% of the country's vineyards are within 50 kilometres of the sea. Most are much closer. So you are getting a real moderation of climate here. Now, Marlborough is on the same latitude as Rome. If you superimposed a map of Europe on New Zealand, you would find that Northland is on about the same latitude as Jerez, showing producer, and in the far south, Queenstown down to Invercargill are around the same latitude as Bordeaux. So why are they not making sherry styles on Bordeaux in Queenstown? Well, that all once again leads back to the fact that this is a maritime climate. They are in the middle of nowhere, and they are subjected to a lot of weather conditions that you are not subjected to in the north. So New Zealand's viticulture, its latitude does not equate with Europe. Now, if you look to the west coast, just to the west of, say, Queenstown, which is on the 45th parallel in the South Island, you'll see that there's a lake called Milford Sounds. Now they receive about 6 meters of rain annually. There's a town called Hokitika, which actually makes a joke of having nearly 14 meters of rain on its highest peaks. However, in Marlborough, for example, you only get 700 millimeters. The reason why viticulture is predominantly on the east coast of New Zealand is because of that rainfall. Rainfall becomes progressively less as you head east. You get the Southern Alps, which runs along the backbone of the South Island, and that really most of the rain falls on those mountains, and the east coast rules. Let's talk a bit about history. I'm a historian by trade. So it's a very new world country. While the South Africans, the Argentinians and the Chileans had taken off a few centuries earlier, it wasn't until 1819 that a Yorkshireman, no less, planted the first vines. A man called Samuel Marsden planted the first vines in Kerry. And the picture that you see on this slide is of Marsden's Cross. Now, Marsden Cross is there to commemorate the first Christian service that took place in New Zealand on Christmas Eve, 1814. However, vines didn't really take off. James Busby, who was then Her Majesty's resident in New Zealand, he made the first wine in New Zealand, and then the first vines were planted in Hawke's Bay by Christian missionaries who came from France. They came over, they set off in 1836 actually. It took them quite a while to get there. They went via Chile, dropped a few people off en route, then dropped another couple of people off en route at French Polynesia. One of them got the head chopped off for trying to convert the local priests, the local tribesman's son. And by the time they got to New Zealand, it was 1848. They set up vines in Hawke's Bay, and to this day, the Mission Estate Winery still exists. However, it was a book called Pioneers and Visionaries, which is, if you want to know about the history of New Zealand, is a must read. This tells you all about what happened. Pioneers and Visionaries were there because really they were isolated cases. The reason why viticulture didn't take off in New Zealand in the 19th century and didn't really take off until the 1970s, truth be known, is that New Zealand was settled by beer drinking Brits, whiskey swilling Scots. It wasn't settled by Spanish, Italians, Greeks. They didn't go over there. They didn't take a wine culture, and it took a really long time to take off. I don't know if you know, but in 1893, New Zealand gave women the vote. They were the first in the world to give women suffrage. At that time, there was a growing temperance movement. And once women had got the vote, they then turned their attention to the temperance movement. And this was a growing campaign. By the early 1900s, quite a few districts had gone dry already. This movement continued to grow, and it was in 1919, the same year that the US had their vote on prohibition, that New Zealand had a national vote on prohibition. New Zealand, the residents of New Zealand voted in favour of prohibition. However, at that time, Anzac troops were still stationed in Europe after World War I. They voted 3-4 in favour of staying wet. And if it hadn't been for those Anzac troops stationed predominantly in Britain, then New Zealand would have gone dry like the US did in 1920. Fast forward into the 1900s, lots of fortified wine is made in the first half of the century, and it wasn't until 1973 Marlborough's first vines were planted. Lots of people think that the first Sauvignon Blanc was planted in Marlborough in 1973, but Sauvignon Blanc didn't come to 75. It's amazing to think that it wasn't until 87 that the first Central Otago Pinot was actually made. As you can see from the statistics in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the huge growth that has occurred since 2000, nearly quadrupling. The current statistics are up around nearly 39,000. Okay, very quickly, because statistics are boring. So as you can see here, they speak for themselves. You can see that Sauvignon Blanc dominates here with a little bit of Pinot, okay? Sauvignon Blanc makes up 60% of total plantings, but it actually makes up 86% of exports, which is quite incredible. When it comes to key varieties, happy Sauvignon Blanc Day, everybody. Excuse me. So Marlborough accounts for 89% of all Sauvignon Blanc produced in New Zealand, which I think is incredible. Without further ado, let's head to Marlborough. So what makes Marlborough so unique? It has been proven that New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is unique in its own way. Here's the reason why. A little bit of science here. So it has been shown by sensory scientists that thiols in New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc are much higher than they are in Sauvignon Blanc in any other part of the world. Thiols are, here comes science again, sulfur-containing compounds that are formed during fermentation. You might recognise them in the glass by flavours like sweaty, passion fruit, gooseberry, boxwood, those sort of things. Now, they are really high compared to any other country Sauvignon Blanc in the world. Now, Marlborough is a cool climate. Let's not forget that it's on the South Island. It really wasn't until the late 70s that people thought that you could plant grapes in large parts of the South Island. They thought it was too cool. And today, even lots of parts of South Island are too cool to plant vines. This cool climate makes wines that are always fresh, they're always crisp. However, when you compare, say, Sancerre to New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, you might find one huge difference is that while they both share similar climate characteristics in terms of their growing degree days and that sort of thing, New Zealand has around a third more sunshine than, say, Sancerre. So it has about 2,400 odd sunshine hours per year, whereas Sancerre only has 1,800. So you get this incredible ripeness, yet freshness, and the sensory scientists based in New Zealand have called this fruity yet green, and I think that really encapsulates what is so idiosyncratic about New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Right, fruity yet green. Okay, I think that you have had 15 minutes of me talking nerdy stuff. If you would like a drink, which I'm sure you're all thirsty, it is Friday night after all. Let's move on, if the technology permits. Okay. What I have done here is I have selected 6 wines that demonstrate not only they're delicious, but they also demonstrate something about New Zealand, what is happening now. Today it's Sauvignon Blanc Day, and I'm showing you Churton's Best End Sauvignon Blanc from 2018. The reason why I'm showing you this wine is for several reasons. Firstly, Marlborough. Its Sauvignon Blanc is mainly planted on the alluvial valley floors, the flat. This one is planted on a hillside, which we'll discover more of when I go and taste the Pinot Noir from Greywacke, which is built on the southern valleys. What's more, this is Marlborough Sauvignon, not as you know it, because most of the Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc that you will see is made from the MS clone. There hasn't been a great deal of exploration when it comes to clones in Marlborough and wider New Zealand. Its success is based on this MS clone. This might change, who knows, and it might change the expression of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc as we move forward. However, for Churton, for this one, they use a Bordeaux clones 316 and 317. What's more, it's organic. They've been organic since 2008. They were one of the first 20 producers to go to organic, and they're about to start the process of going towards biodynamic processes. What's more, this is a story about the second generation. New Zealand is really only coming to the end of its first generation of winemakers. The modern winemaking, winemaking scene in New Zealand really started in the late 70s, early 80s. And you know, those first generation are heading towards retirement now, and you're seeing a new generation come up. And at Churton, the new generation have just started to take over the reins here. I think it's a real issue for the New Zealand, and something that other places like Napa need to look into more, that the farmers are becoming older, and Deloitte, the accounting firm, has expressed concern in various reports that a lot of New Zealand's first generation haven't got a plan for success. However, Churton does. What's more, these are tiny yields, so 30 hectolitres a hectare. It's bugger all, really. The reason for that is that the best end plot, it sits on a really narrow ridge, and it's really exposed, so it gets battered by the winds, so you get a smaller canopy than usual and really small, intense berries. But I've also chosen because it's really delicious. This is fermented in large format oak or wild yeast. This is showing another side to Sauvignon Blanc. It's not just put in stainless steel, it's not inoculated, and it's left on lees to develop texture. I hope you can see all that in the wine. I can't, of course, but anyway, I have got a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, so while you're tasting that, I'll have a refresher. And I can see the chat is lighting up with lots of questions. I'll have questions at the end, and I'll have a wee look through them and see what I can answer, but I don't want the flow of the presentation to be disturbed, so I'll continue. Next up is Atarangi Craig Hall Chardonnay. Now, why have I chosen this one? Well, if you're choosing a Chardonnay from New Zealand, the obvious one to go for is Kumeu River. It's everywhere because it's fabulous and has so much critical acclaim, quite rightly. However, it feels to me that people are not exploring New Zealand Chardonnay as much as they ought to. They stick with Kumeu River and don't go far enough beyond that. But there are so many great Chardonnays in New Zealand, and I cannot celebrate them enough. I think Jancis once said that Chardonnay should be New Zealand's signature variety. In fact, it was New Zealand's leading variety for a brief period. In 1996, it took over from Mullaturgau as New Zealand's most productive variety, but it only had 6 years as the leader. until Sauvignon Blanc took its current place as the most productive variety in New Zealand. I also wanted to show you this because it exemplifies what is going on in fine New Zealand Chardonnay right now. In the past decade, we have seen a lot more hands-off winemaking. They're picking earlier, less alcohol. We are seeing lots more, so less alcohol, of course, less of that really exuberant fruit expression. We're seeing less oak. People are using larger formats. They're using more used rather than new. You're seeing less mallow as well. There still are a lot of top class Chardonnays that are 100% mallow, but there are quite a number that are partial mallow, such as this one here today. Many producers in New Zealand are experimenting with high solid ferments at the moment, and that's creating really flinty characters. Some, who shall remain unnamed, are very flinty to the burnt, that struck batch character, and sometimes that's at the expense of the beauty of the Chardonnay. The other reason I want to show you this was that it shows how far New Zealand, Martinborough, this particular village, has come in such a long time. In the late 1970s, a government scientist called Derek, he wrote a report on the suitability of not only Martinborough, but Waipara and Marlborough as well. He wrote this piece saying, actually, I think we can grow grapes here. And in 1979, Neil McCullum of Dry River, formerly of Dry River, he was the first to plant on the Puratanga Road, which is the main road of vineyards today in Martinborough. And it's quite comedic that even in 1991, a journalist from the Wine Spectator first visited and they couldn't find anywhere for him to stay. There wasn't anywhere suitable in Martinborough. It was a declining backwater until vines came along. It's about an hour's drive from Wellington, yet it was slightly forgotten until viticulture came. It turned out that this Wine Spectator journalist was put up by a local couple because the hotels were so poor. And yet today, Martinborough has all these beautiful boutique hotels, restaurants, and has a thriving tourism scene. And that's in a really short period of time. It was in 1980 that single dad Clive Patton, he sold his milking cows and he bought a piece of land here that became Atarangi. And Craig Hall, the block that makes Atarangi Chardonnay, is just across the road from the home block. It's on 30-year-old vines from free draining gravels. Most of Martinborough is free draining gravels. Hand-picked, whole bunch pressed. You've got to do that if you want to make top flight Chardonnay in New Zealand. Unsettled, lots of people aren't settling their juice anymore, for very brief periods of time, using wild yeasts and leaving it on lees. This is made from the Mendoza clone, which is really, really important in the New Zealand wine scene. Other people are planting things like 95 and 15, but Mendoza is a very popular variety in New Zealand Chardonnay. I hope you enjoy this Chardonnay that I'm not drinking with you, but I know it's really good. And what I love about it is I love its integration, even though it's only 2018. And what I love about it is it has such great precision. Yeah, it has beautiful weight on the palate. Okay, I'm going to take a breath now. I hope you all like my flag behind me. I even put lipstick on for the occasion, although I am still in my slippers, it has to be said. Yeah, I won't be the only one. I know that. Okay, so now we're going to Pinot Noir. In 1990, there was more Reichensteiner, there was more Palomino, and there was more Chasselas than there was Pinot Noir. So once again, this is a very new wave for the wine world, I guess. It is now the second most planted variety after Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand. It's the most planted red variety. The first Pinot Noir to be planted in New Zealand was actually in Auckland, which is highly unsuitable for producing New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, New Zealand Pinot Noir. Now, the reason why I have chosen this grey wacky today, not only is it fabulous, but I wanted to champion Marlborough Pinot Noir. Marlborough sometimes sits in the shadows of other places like Martinborough and Central Otago, and I feel that it isn't potentially championed as much as it should be. Even I gave it a hard time when I moved to New Zealand in 2009. I was like, it's light, it's fruity, it's fun, but I don't feel there's a great deal of seriousness here. And on the alluvial valley floors, it is hard to build density and richness from these wines. Yet in 2004, what's called the Southern Valleys was able to be planted because of an irrigation scheme that went in the hills. Now, the Southern Valleys irrigation scheme allowed people to plant there, to establish vineyards. The Clavin vineyard, which is Gießen, which is used to make things like From and Gießen, that was established before the irrigation system went in. But you really couldn't establish young vines then, and now viticulture is viable. And what makes these hillsides so much more suitable to these to making great richer Pinot Noir is the clayless soils that are on the hills, but also the exposure. New Zealand, I mean, Marlborough Pinot Noir is also coming of age in a way, I believe, because those vines that were planted in the Southern Valleys, maybe now 16 years ago, they are gaining maturity. The vines are coming of age, which means that there's less need to use oak barrels to really drive the tannin. What's happening is that these older vines are able to give real good skin and seed tannins, which is making for much more sophisticated Pinot Noir. Now, this is Grey Wacky, owned by Kevin Judd. He set up in 2009, and he was ex-Cloudy Bay, so he was at Cloudy Bay for 25 years and then decided that it was time to go and do his own thing, and it's really worked out for him. 2017, while it rained, there was quite a lot of rain in 2017 harvest, which made a really tricky picking period for the Sauvignon Blanc. Pinot Noir is an earlier ripener, so that actually was, the 17s are actually pretty good when it comes to Pinot Noir, because they were in before the big deluge hit. These wines are destemmed, but it has a high percentage of whole bunch. It's soaked on its skins, and then natural yeast is allowed to get it going. It's about 30% new oak on this. I think that's, and the alcohol's at 30.5%, but who cares? It's balanced. Now, and what I'm doing here this evening is next I'm going to be moving on to Essential Otago Pinot Noir from Burnt Cottage. So it'll be really interesting for those of you who have the wines in the glass to compare Marlborough to Central Otago. However, I think the Grey Wacky potentially isn't the Marlborough of old, and Central Otago is the Central Otago Pinot is not the Central Otago of old. So I think it's a really nice comparison to see what is happening in both regions right now. So Central Otago is the most southerly wine producing region in the world. Yes, there are vineyards in, say, Patagonia, in Chile and Argentina that are more southerly than Central Otago, but there is no coherent region. So Central Otago still holds the title of being the most southerly wine region in the world. It is a semi-continental climate. Now, the majority of New Zealand is a maritime climate, and when it comes to vintage reports, when you read a New Zealand vintage report, you have to take it with a pinch of salt, because if it's just a very general one, because Central Otago could be having a great time when the rest of the country is having a terrible time, or when it's having a terrible time, the rest of the country can be having a wonderful time. So it can be very variable, such as in 2012 when it wasn't a great vintage for the rest of New Zealand, but for Central 2012, fabulous. I like to call Central Otago the bikini and the beanie climate, because of this. It's got really warm days. So during the day you can put your bikini on, it's super hot, and then at night the temperatures fall. There can be as much as 25, 30 degrees different in diurnal temperature difference. So it's the bikinis and the beanies for me. And you don't really see that in a lot of regions. And I think that really contributes to the intense colour that you find in Central Otago Pinot Noirs. It also helps that really cool nights. They help to preserve that fruitiness. It also helps preserve the acidity. The reason why I have chosen this particular wine to show you is 3 or 4-fold. First of all, it's owned by an American. So it's owned by Marcus Sauvage, whose family have a distribution company in the USA. And they also have an estate in the Phelps. This is a growing trend in New Zealand. We're seeing a large number of overseas investment approvals. People want to make wine in New Zealand. This has always been the case. The New Zealand wine industry has been based on immigrants, whether it was the Corbans from Lebanon, or whether it's the large Dalmatian community, the Brakoviches, the Solgens, the Fistiniches. The New Zealand wine industry is a United Nations. It's a melting pot, whether you're in Martinborough, you've got Kai Schubert, you've got Hiro Kasuda, you've got, and here we've got in Central Otago, we've got Burn Cottage owned by an American, and just down the road you've got Nigel Greening from the UK. Hello Nigel, if you're listening in this evening. And we've also got Rudy Bauer from Austria in the same town. That's one of the reasons New Zealand is a melting pot. Second reason is that I think that Burn Cottage represents a unique preposition in that from day one it was farmed biodynamically. I don't think there are a lot of estates who can boast that they were farmed biodynamically from day one. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a little drink. This wine also represents something that's really going on in Central Otago at the moment, and that's earlier picking. Now, along with, say, Felton Road and Burn Cottage, they're two of the key producers in the region that are picking maybe up to a week earlier than other producers in the region. They're picking earlier to go for those lower alcohols, but they're also finding that they are getting ripeness without heaviness, without that richness. In 2002, it wasn't until 2002 that Central Otago first made its splash. That was the first vintage that was seen in the UK at big tastings, and these were quite big, rich, dark coloured, really quite firm, big, ballsy Pinot Noirs. Central Otago has developed a reputation, somewhat of a reputation for that, but this represents something. This represents a new wave of Central Otago Pinot Noirs, very sensitively made, earlier picked with lower alcohols. The intervention here is very low. There's no yeast added. They don't filter. It's like a quarter of it is whole bunch. This is new wave, if you can call it that, for want of a better word, Pinot Noir from Central Otago. And I think this is the way that things may develop. Keep a watch on it. I'm ready to move on now. I'm probably racing through this, but you know, it's Friday night, you can go for dinner after this. Okay. We're next heading to Syrah, which in my opinion is the most distinctive red variety grown in New Zealand. To me, New Zealand Syrah is as distinctive as New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. However, that didn't really help the Master of Wine students in the exam last year when 2 Hawke's Bay Syrahs were put in the lineup. I don't think very many people got it right. What makes New Zealand Syrah so distinctive? For me, it has this bright new world brightness. It's got beautiful blackberry fruit, quite rich in style, and yet at the same time it has that lovely spicy smoky bacon cool edge that you get from cool climate Syrah, say in northern Rome. One of the distinctive characters that Hawke's Bay has is the black pepper character, or the white pepper. white and black pepper sometimes. And that comes from a compound called rotundone. And rotundone comes from, there hasn't been a lot of research done on it until the last sort of 5 or 6 years. Now, rotundone is responsible for that black pepper character. You typically find it in more cooler climes, and if you put, say, a 1 mil of rotundone in a 50-metre Olympic swimming pool, the pool would smell of black pepper. However, if you can't detect that in Hawke's Bay Syrahs, or any Syrahs for that matter, you might have anosmia. So 1 in 5 of us cannot smell that. So don't give yourself a hard time. Okay. We're going to taste Trinity Hill's homage tonight. And this, for me, is one of the most fabulous Syrahs in all of New Zealand. It is planted on the gimlet gravels. As you can see from the picture, it is fairly flat on the gimlet gravels, and that is because it is a former riverbed. In 1867, the Naruroro River flooded and changed course, and it left behind the gravels. Now, the gravels were not used for vineyards until early 80s, and today it makes the vineyard land is some of the most expensive and coveted. Before it was used as a vineyard area, it was used as a drag strip, it was used as a quarry. There still is a quarry there. And this was because people didn't prize this free draining gravelly soil. You certainly couldn't graze sheep on here, nothing else would grow. But it's very free draining, and you find that the stones, the stones are actually visible on the surface, and they reflect heat in much the same way that you see the heat reflecting, say, Chateauneuf-du-Pape. If you study the flora, that's something we all learn. This particular Syrah, it was produced in 2016, and which is a very warm and dry season. The yields from this wine are super low, 30 to 35 hectolitres a hectare, which is lower than, say, some Grand Cru Classic in Bordeaux. They're usually around 45 on a normal year. The guys at Trinity Hill, Warren Gibson, awesome winemaker, treats his Syrah a bit like Pinot, I guess, in that he uses quite a lot of whole bunch. About 30% of this is whole bunch fermented. He even makes one batch just 100% whole bunch ferment. He actually also puts in some Viognier skins into the ferment. So if you're detecting a slightly lifted floral aromatic, you could say, oh yes, that's the whole bunch, but you could also say potentially it's those Viognier skins that he uses too. It's hand plunged twice daily and then spends 15 months in oak. If you like this wine, I can't see why anyone wouldn't. I think that this is a great place to start exploring Syrah from New Zealand. It's mainly planted in Hawke's Bay. However, you can go to Waiheke Island, which is just, as I say, which is just off Auckland, about 40 minutes from the CBD, and they're even trying to make Syrah in Marlborough, say from Te Whare Rā, or from, and in warmer vintage, it's very successful. The last wine I am showing you tonight is an absolute classic. We're staying in the Hawke's Bay, but we're leaving the Gimlet Gravels behind. We're going to the Havelock Hills, which is a little more towards the coast. So if you're at the coast in Hawke's Bay, it's a lot cooler than it is on the Gimlet Gravels. For example, if you went to, say, Elephant Hill or Te Aronga Estate, which is on the coast, right on the shoreline, you can, and then you drive inland, so 25-30 kilometres to the Gimlet Gravels, there can be as much as 7 degrees difference in temperature because it's not getting those cooling sea breezes. The Havelock Hills are sort of more towards Te Aronga than they are the Gimlet Gravels. The reason why I have chosen this wine today is not only is it considered the Bordeaux blend of New Zealand. It's, critics have said, it's as close to, a classified growth as you're going to get in New Zealand. But I also want to show this because it's really important in the history of New Zealand wine. It's one of the oldest wineries in New Zealand. It still has a winery building that dates back to 1896. And in New Zealand terms, that is very, very old. This was pioneered in 1896 by a man called Bernard Chambers, and André Simon, the French wine writer, the late French wine writer, he went out there in 1964 and he tasted the 1912 Taimata and was incredibly impressed. This wine was 48 years old, and he said, it doesn't show the slightest signs of decay, and it's very good indeed. They also had the audacity to put the 1912 Taimata next to Chateau Margaux, and in his words, he said he actually stood up pretty well indeed. So even at the start of the 20th century, the quality of these wines was apparent. Sadly, because of that strong temperance movement and that prohibition vote that we talked about before, there wasn't a great deal of demand for their wines, and there particularly wasn't a great deal of demand for dry table wines in the first half of the 20th century in New Zealand. This is domestic consumption. There was no overseas markets yet, and in the words of sorry, I'll have a glass of water. And Taimata turned into a fortified wine factory of sorts. Much like the rest of the New Zealand wine industry, they had to make a product that there was some demand for, and so fortified wines became the wines of New Zealand for that period. It wasn't until John Buck took over in the 70s that he turned things around. The Buck family are in charge of that today. Coleraine is named after John Buck's father, who was born in Coleraine in Northern Ireland, and the unique building that you see, which is part of the Taimata estate, the homestead there is also called Coleraine. This wine was first made in 1982, and to begin with it was just the Coleraine single vineyard, but now it's a selection of parcels that Taimata own. This is a blend of 51% Cabernet Sauvignon, it's 47% Merlot, and 2% Cabernet Franc. Now, when it comes to Cabernet and Merlot in New Zealand, now Merlot, it tends to dominate the plant. There's more, let's say there's more Merlot in Hawke's Bay than there is Cabernet Sauvignon plantings. And that's because, yes, it is warm enough in Hawke's Bay to ripen Cabernet Sauvignon, but certainly not every year. And because of New Zealand's position, an island in the middle of the South Pacific, it does tend to see the remnants of tropical cyclones in certain years, which tend to come through in February, March or April. So they can disrupt the harvest. So you see that most Hawke's Bay Bordeaux style blends do have a leaning towards Merlot because it is a greater insurance policy. However, like Bordeaux, they've had an amazing string of vintages, 13, 14, 15, 16. And it looks like 2020 is going to be another stunner. So in those long, dry, warm autumns, Cabernet Sauvignon can be really, really impressive. I wanted to show that the Syrah, and I wanted to show this Cabernet Merlot blend tonight because I wanted to show you that while Pinot Noir is the most planted red variety in New Zealand, I think that what we might term its classic reds from the more temperate climes of Hawke's Bay and the North Island, they have a lot going for them, and I think they deserve to be explored by people who wine lovers. I represent a few wineries in the UK, New Zealand wineries, and I know it's a really hard sell to sell Syrah and to sell Bordeaux blends from New Zealand. But for fine wine lovers, Pall Mall members and drinkers, this is something that needs to be explored further. Okay, so that brings me to my arranging quiz. I'm taking questions, so if you'd like to shoot some questions on me, I'm going to now open up the chat and have a look. Maybe, Ronan, you could sort of highlight a few questions for me. And while I'm getting those questions through, I just think that I would like to conclude by saying, yes, New Zealand's a very young country. And I think that sometimes we forget how young New Zealand is in terms of its wine scene. It has experienced such rapid international success. It's a long way from Pall Mall, but that doesn't mean we can't bring it to you. I think you can, and the thing is, you can produce these brilliant, racy, cool climate whites and Pinot on the South Island. But I think that the last two wines that I showed you today also show that you can be hugely successful with the Bordeaux blends and the Syrah on the warmer North Island. I hope that's inspired you to potentially explore New Zealand wine a bit more. Yes, and if you wish to explore it, there's this really great book written by somebody, I don't know who it might be. Yes, you can go onto my website, you can purchase one, rebeccagibb.com. Thought I'd throw it in there. Right, I'm going to try and see the chat now. Chat. Thanks. I think that the other thing about that Coleraine that I showed you at the end, I had the 2005 in Magnum. Yeah, we're talking about having a little bit of a chat on the chat about it's great ageability. Yes, Andre Simon may have tasted it at 48 years old and said it didn't show the slightest sign of decay. I think that it continues to do that. First question, if you were going to start a vineyard in New Zealand, where would it be? Well, I don't have enough money and I have more sense than to start a vineyard. That is never going to happen. I think that if I were to start I would go to a little known region, an hour's drive north of Christchurch. I would go to Waipara. I would go into the Omahi Hills, which are the clay limestone loamy hills, just north of the Waipara township, where they're making exceptional Pinot Noirs. There's quite a large iron content in the soils, and that you see used really sort of like meat. It's a really meaty brooding style. I recommend producers like Greystone, Black Estate, Fancrest. I'm sorry to those people who I've forgotten to mention, but yes, that's it. What else? Yeah, Waipara, go Waipara. Yeah. However, there is this thing happening with Waipara that they're renaming themselves as North Canterbury, because Waipara, so it really sounds really similar to Wairarapa, which is where Martinborough is, and then there's also Waiheke, and then there's the Waitaki. Wai means water in Maori. So yes, it's quite difficult. If you haven't been to New Zealand and you aren't intimately, you haven't visited them, Waipara, Wairarapa. So yes, you'll see that Waipara, you'll see a lot of people are putting North Canterbury on the labels. There's a question here about climate changes. Yeah, actually, I have some graphs. So if anyone's interested in seeing a bit more about climate change, I attended Sauvignon Blanc 2019 last year, and there's a meteorologist came, and the graphs that they showed of the drying of New Zealand and the warming of New Zealand are certainly happening, and that's perhaps a good thing for say Marlborough, Syrah. Whether it's great for other varieties, we shall see. But yes, certainly there have been lots of, 2018, for example, was the warmest summer on record. And there's more than 100 years of data. So there is certainly a lot to say for climate change occurring. What sort of price points are these wines? You're looking between, say, 25 and 40 for the top wines. I haven't shown you anything cheap. I've been generous this evening. see. Any more questions? How does the ozone hole influence the viticulture in New Zealand? Yes, that is a very important question. There's a hole in the ozone layer above New Zealand, and there has been a study by the owner of Maori Point Vineyard, he's a doctor of something or other. So this gentleman, if anyone wants their study, I can forward it on to them. Just get in touch with me through rebeccagibb.com. I can send it to you. But New Zealand experiences 40% more UV radiation than its latitude would suggest it should. Now that's because there is a hole in the ozone layer, but it's also because the air in New Zealand is incredibly clean. There isn't a great deal of pollution in New Zealand. That's partly because it's a long way away. It's certainly not due to the fabulous public transport that they have in New Zealand, because public transport in New Zealand is almost non-existent. If you want to get anywhere in New Zealand, you have to get in a car. Do you think Sauvignon popularity will grow more, or will it decrease in the future? Here's the thing. I think that I do my writing, but I also work with some brands in the UK. So I'm dealing with national retailers and independents. And what I see is that the demand for Sauvignon Blanc seems to be insatiable. We are reaching sort of a plateauing point here in the UK, both in Australia, Ireland to some extent. However, my husband, he works with Sacred Hill in New Zealand, and he goes to Germany, he goes to Poland, he goes to Denmark, and for those markets, some people don't even know, have never tasted New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc before. It's a completely new experience. The US market is certainly not at saturation point. There's still a long way to go. And there are so many other markets to be explored. So there are still a lot of new plantings coming on stream this year, this vintage from Marlborough. And to be honest, there's been a couple of slightly shorter vintages, and there's no business. Some people have no need for business development because they're selling all that they can make. What else are you saying? What are the markers? What are the markers for you of a Bordeaux blend from Hawke's Bay? I think that they're very similar to what you would see in a Bordeaux blend from Bordeaux. I do think that there is a slightly richer style that you get potentially from the high UV light. There isn't a great deal in terms of climate that separates them. The average temperature in Hawke's Bay is around 19 to 20 degrees, whereas in Bordeaux it is 20.3. However, you do get cooler nights in Hawke's Bay than you tend to do in Bordeaux. So you might see a little more freshness. On the gimlet gravels, the soil is very skinny, it's very free draining, it's alluvial. So I feel that sometimes it does lack, it needs that Merlot plumpness to flesh out that skeleton. It's sometimes a little bit skeletal in its frame. I hope that explains a little bit more. What is the main difference between Martinborough Pinot Noir and Central Otago Pinot Noir? I think one of the most exciting things, I'll come back to you, Marshall, about your sparkling question in a moment. What's the main difference? So Martinborough, whilst it's on the North Island, it remains a very cool climate. The winds come on, it's really windy. Basically, Marlborough on the top of the South Island manages to escape the winds because it is protected by mountains. However, the winds then funnel up towards Wellington, hitting all the parliamentarians, and it also funnels up into Martinborough. So what we get with Martinborough is you get really low yields because the shoots sometimes get battered, but you also get, because of that wind, you get really small berries with thick skins. So from Martinborough, you should expect quite a deeply coloured, quite tannic, not like I'm talking peanut tannins here, quite tannic example with really, you're always going to get high level of concentration in Martinborough because of those small yields. Typically you'll have a really quite a savoury style. The classic style of Central Otago of old potentially is a little bit, you're going to see a little bit more fruit ripeness. You're probably going to see more sort of like black cherry. You might see a bit of gary character. Your alcohol's maybe 0.51% higher on those. I hope that helps you. In terms of sparkling wine producers in New Zealand, the one that you automatically think of would be Daniel LeBrun, who has not his Daniel LeBrun, somebody else has taken his name now, but number one family estate. He is a Champenois. He comes from the Côte de Blanc. He set up his own estate, Daniel Lebrun, which was then bought by Lion. I can't remember that bit. But Daniel Lebrun then set up after gardening leave, and he'd taken his period of not being able to make sparkling wines in New Zealand. He then went on to set up his own estate called Number One Family Estate. I also highly rate the vintage Polaris, not so much the non-vintage. I can do without that. And the vintage Blanc de Blanc from Quartz Reef. It's in a sort of a more Ruinart bottle, a squat bottle. It was recently tasting sort of an older vintage of Quartz Reef made by Rudy Bauer in Central Otago, who's an Austrian. And yeah, they would be sort of my three picks. Any suggested wine and food pairings? What would you serve with Goulash? Sauvignon Blanc. Sorry, is that an obvious answer? Yeah, probably. Somebody's asked me about medium price Pinot from Otago. Escarpments from, I think Neil, escarpments from Martinborough, but I think escarpment is one of my favourite producers in New Zealand. I love those wines. In terms of a medium-priced Pinot from Otago, Mount Difficulty maybe. I love Mount Edward. I love the guys who make it. He's got a great fancy dress cupboard and a disco ball in his house. So if you ever fancy a party, Mount Edwards is the place to go. I'm just having a look through. I'm also, if you enjoyed this evening, I'm also, I don't know if you know, as well as writing about wine, helping people sell wine, I also have a jigsaw business. I make jigsaws, wine and spirit jigsaws of wine maps. And on a Monday evening, I host a wine quiz. And on Monday, I've actually got decent prizes to win as well. So if you want to join, have a look for Bamboozled Games on Facebook, and the event information will be on there. Great for during lockdown. Is there anyone whose questions I've missed? If I have missed your questions, as I say, go on to RebeccaGibb.com and there's a contact form on there. You can get in, you can get me. Or last one from us, do you have a favourite New Zealand wine? I probably have a favourite variety, which is Syrah, but I don't think I should. I don't really think I should be naming favourite producers. In my book, I put my 10 top must-try Sauvignons, my 10 must-try Chardonnays, my 10 must-try Syrahs. So I have picked out 10 I love, but I'm not going to pick out one. It's a bit cheeky. Dry river is delicious. I think that probably brings things to a close. Thank you very much for joining me. At one point, we had more than 200, which is incredible. I hope you've enjoyed it. I have enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sauvignon Blanc day. I'd like to say cheers to that. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, whatever you're up to. And I just wish you that you all stay safe, stay happy, even though we're all at the end of our wits through the lockdown. I really enjoyed it. I hope I see some of you in 67. And if I don't, please stay in touch. I'm dead easy to get hold of. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, Rebecca. Hey, thank you so much. That was great stuff.